Hi folks, Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I'm doing yet another installment in the freelancing Q&A series, at least if I can get my notes to scroll properly here. So if you're not familiar, or if this is your first time tuning in for a stream and or seeing a video, every week I go through a question in the shrinking but like substantial backlog that I've had of questions about business from freelancers and software developers over the years. So this week's question is it worth it to bring in subcontractors? Now, I don't remember the context of this one as well as the last couple of weeks. Kind of jumping around in order here, but I believe this is asked in the context of doing custom application development as a freelancer. So is it worth it to bring in subcontractors? And I guess this is where the context would have been more handy, and I probably should have followed up instead of doing this async, but like, what do we mean by worth it? So I'm gonna talk through that, like different typically reasons that people will bring in subcontractors, because that's really what's going to determine whether it's, worth it, so to speak, is like what your goal is. But before doing that, let me actually define subcontracting generally. And maybe I should have looked up a definition for this afterwards, but generally what this means is that you are providing a service to somebody. So you have a business and you are providing services to another business. So you are a contractor in that world, and or you could call yourself a vendor, but let's call you the contractor to make it clear what the sub means. So you have a client and you are a contractor. The subcontractor brings in another contractor or another business owner or another freelancer under their umbrella to do work for the client. So let's say I would sometimes subcontract work when I was mostly a solo operation with Dead Tech doing my consulting. But, I can think of some situations where I did a code-based assessment for a client, and then there was some follow-up implementation stuff to be done. So I would go in and do this bit of consulting and then make some recommendations, and often they would say, can you help us institute some of these recommendations? Sometimes they were further kind of consultative things that I might be able to implement, but at other times I might bring someone else on, especially if it was going to be like application development or something like that. So there might be this two-part project where I did an assessment, and then say I recommended that they needed to install a unit test suite or something. I might then project manage the follow-up and bring in another person who was actually going to do the implementation. That person in this arrangement would have been a subcontractor. So the subcontractor in this world where Dead Tech LLC is doing business with a client, the client doesn't pay both me and this other person that I'm bringing in. The client pays me. So I invoice the client for both of our work, both my work and the subcontractor's work, and the client pays me for that. And then I turn around and I pay that subcontractor generally, while layering what's known as a margin on top. So if the subcontractor charges me $4,000 for the work, maybe I charge the client $5,000 for that work. The actual amount of the margin can vary wildly depending on a lot of factors that are probably beyond the scope of this for the most part. So I won't get into the particulars of figuring out what to pay for margins. This is really just, is the idea of subcontractors a good one? So the person asking this question is likely doing freelance work and saying, for whatever reason, like, should I take on subcontractors to help me deliver work to the client is what's going on here. And so my answer to that is, why are you taking on this work? Let me walk through. I can kind of think of three main reasons that this might come up. So in the custom app dev world, my guess is the most likely reason that this comes up is you're a freelancer, building websites, let's say, custom websites for clients, and you get an order in from a bigger client, and they want, this fairly substantial website built over the next 3 months. And you look at that and you're like, whoa, there's no way I can do that. That's like 10 person months of work, and I'm only one person. What do I do? Do I turn down this business? No, I want the business. So I'm going to bring some friends in, and professional friends, and we are going to build this website together. So that's a pretty common reason for freelancers to take on subcontractors. And I would venture to guess that in most cases, this is the first foray. It's the thing that prompts you to actually do this for the first time. I believe, I can't even remember the first time I did subcontracting anymore, but I believe it was probably something like this when I did it. So you're essentially extending your capacity. You want to take on a piece of business, but you can't serve the business by yourself. It just requires more work in less time than you're capable of delivering on your own. So in this scenario, you bring in subcontractors who do a similar thing to what you do. So if you are a web developer and this is building a website, you're going to go round up other web developers, probably freelance web developers, maybe FTEs that are moonlighting. But you go out and you find people that are similar in expertise to you and are a similar kind of technician to you, and you all work on it together. So this one would be worth it. Like I would recommend that you do this if you really want this client and you really want this work, because you're probably not going to have a choice. I wouldn't, go try to do 5 people's worth of work as just one person. I will say in this scenario, I would recommend against, if you've never taken on subcontractors before and you get something that requires 5 or 10 times the capacity you have, that's not the way I would first go into taking on subcontractors, because you're going from like 0 to agency. And that's just I would build on incremental success, taking on 1 or 2 here and there and building up reps that way. But you would kind of have to weigh that. I mean, if, this is a life-changing opportunity or something, you could always try and figure it out on the fly. It's just a high-risk proposition. It's more likely that you're going to get some work. Like say you're already working, doing some work for a client or two, mostly full-time, and you get another piece of work that you could probably handle by yourself, but you're a little bit close to capacity and you don't think you can. This is a good scenario to go out and find, a colleague or something and dip your toe in the water of subcontracting by splitting the effort on this new incremental piece of business. Something like that is a good first go into subcontracting, I would say. Because you're going to learn some things. You're going to learn some things at tax time from doing that. You have probably never taken on expenses before. You're going to need to learn about what's called 1099 on the contractor side of that. You're going to need to learn about having accounts payable, which is probably not something you're used to doing. So anyway, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but given that learning that's going to come up, given the relative novelty of that experience, I would try it out in kind of lower stake situations first. But in general, if you're looking for capacity extension, that is worth it when it's worth it to you to take on that unknown and that complexity for the sake of having this client in your book of business. A second type of subcontracting that's pretty common, Hit Subscribe will do this regularly, is subcontracting when you are looking to deliver a larger, broader offering than what you do. So Hit Subscribe, we're actually developing capabilities beyond our historically core capabilities. So we're doing less of this subcontracting, but historically, let's say that somebody came to us and they said, we want to develop a microsite and put content on it and bring in, 100,000 visitors a month. Well, Hit Subscribe can create the content plan for you, the keyword research and all that, and we can fulfill that content. But Hit Subscribe historically doesn't get into the business of like hosting or site building. So what we might do is say, okay, we are going to bring in somebody who does do hosting and, like WordPress design or something. So maybe we're going to quote this project out at $250,000 and we're going to carve out, $10,000 or $20,000 for the initial build out and then the hosting. And if that is the way that you're approaching it, it's basically like, we have the chops to do most of this project, but there's a piece you want done that we don't generally do in-house. So we'll go out and find someone who does that and bring them in. And the reason you would do this type of subcontracting is usually to create a better client experience. So instead of you saying, okay, I'm going to do this piece of your project, now go out here and pay this other person to do this other piece of your project, even though it's kind of a minority of the project. That's, if I don't mind doing that as a general contractor, let's call it, but it's not as good of a client experience. The client, like imagine you're having work done on your house. This is why somebody called a general contractor exists. If you're having a pretty substantial addition put on your house, you don't want to like go out and find the electrician and the drywall taper and the plumber and like all, you just want somebody that you deal with who handles all of those details for you. So this is extending the breadth of your offering. It usually is a good idea, worth it, let's call it, if you have a trusted relationship with a client and they want you to take on more responsibility and be in charge of building out, more stuff than you necessarily have the personnel to do in house. So you go out and you bring that other person in. Now let's go back to our custom app dev or custom app dev like web specialist freelancer. This might happen if, let's say, that you were getting tasked with building out a site and the client said like, oh, and by the way, can you, install this SEO plugin to make sure that we're all set up for SEO? You might say like, that's a pretty relative to building the site. That's a fairly minor detail. I'm going to bring in, this SEO consultant to advise on that and help me out. That's an appropriate use of subcontracting. The calculus on this one is fairly similar for a freelancer. This is going to be if you want the business and you're comfortable taking it on because you want to create a good client experience. I would add the caveat, though, that this one I might be more hesitant to get into because it requires a skill that's easier to fake. And I don't mean like I've done the fake it till you make it video. I don't like it requires a skill that's easier to figure out on the fly if you're doing something in your area, which is project management. So if you are a software developer and that's been your trade, even if you've never managed software developers, you can reason about what's reasonable and project manage another software developer. You know what estimating is like, you know what it should take to do X, Y, and Z. You can keep an eye out for risks. You can recognize when a software developer is floundering and not getting things done, et cetera. It can be harder for you to do that, to manage a kind of labor that you are not expert in if you have never done any management of this sort before. So in this example, you're bringing in this SEO vendor. Have you ever thought about how you would manage that vendor's risk? What if they just say a lot of impressive things, but they're never actually doing anything? Like, how do you recognize that ahead of time? What leading indicators do you look for, and so on and so forth? So what I'm getting at is, if you have never done any kind of subcontracting or management, I'd be a little hesitant about this because you won't have any experience having done this type of thing before. But it might be worth figuring out on the fly if you really want the piece of business, or if you want to gain the experience, or just the situation makes sense for you. So again, it's worth it if it's important enough to you to get the whole contract. It also might be worth it, by the way, if the alternative is that they would go to the other person that you would subcontract and have that person subcontracted to you. But I'm kind of spitballing there. I just wouldn't. I don't really historically love subcontracting under others for reasons that I won't get into, or this will get really long. But when you don't have a direct relationship with the client, there's more optics and stuff to deal with. It's kind of more complicated. I personally, not that I would never subcontract, but I don't really like coming in under somebody else's label. It's just, the final reason I can think of that you as a freelancer might be asking if it's worth it to subcontract is if you're looking ahead and you want to earn margin on somebody else's work. So maybe this would probably take the form of you thinking about a future where you're running an agency and it's not just you. But basically what you're saying is, as a freelancer, you're running, I think of this as a zero profit business. Like freelancing, you're just kind of going from gig to gig, and your realized money all comes from your labor. So the minute you stop doing any work as a freelancer, you stop having any income, you're getting compensated for hours of your time. So you might start to say, okay, well, I want a business where I have some leverage in it. I want a business that generates income for me, even if I'm not doing labor. Taking a margin off of other people's labor is a way to do that, and it can be sort of a reputable way to do that, depending on the particulars. This is this is the essence of building an agency, and your margin on top of other people's labor can be justified by, your superior contacts, your superior SOPs, your superior reach, your superior sales ability, et cetera. So if you become good at finding landing and fulfilling business in a way that maybe somebody who just wants to write the code or something isn't. It's justifiable for you to take a margin on top of that person's labor. But this one gets a little more complicated because the question of whether it's worth it or not becomes a question of, do you want to found an agency or not? If your goal isn't to found an agency, then no, I don't think this is worth it, especially if you don't like the idea of doing that. And so, like, having explained those three patterns, if you will, extending your capacity, extending your breadth, or just deciding to start an agency, let me offer my advice here, just across the board. So if the reason you're asking a question like this, should I take on subcontractors, is a general sense that you feel like you should, or you'll gain experience, or there's more maturity, I would be really hesitant about doing it for those reasons. If there's just this sense that like it's the right thing to do to level up as a whatever. If you feel this kind of like idea that it's some kind of personal development for you, you can give it a try, but I would be very careful of this motivation for a few reasons. One, you're going to be surprised when you start taking on subcontractors by how quickly you go from being a technician that's doing freelance web development or whatever to somebody that is just a full-time manager. And I would say that point hits at somewhere between 4 and 7 people. By the time you have 4 people reporting to you on something, you are starting to slide into the capacity of probably a full-time manager. This is doubly true if you're running a practice wherein you're doing like sales and you're handling all the overhead aspects of the business. So you're handling all of the overhead, you're managing now 4 people. It's not that you couldn't write some code here and there while that was going on. It's more that the code you were writing would start to become supplemental and your schedule would start to become very staccato and broken up. So you wouldn't just be carving out half days or full days at this level of having people report to you. And by the time you've got 7 people in this business, you might even need some like assistantship overhead or something like this. Forget it. By the time you're at 7 people, you're just running a business. You're not freelance anything. So that's thing one to be aware of, is you might think that there's a world where these folks, because they're professionals like you, require very little management. And you can build this stable of like 20 people and you can make like an extra 10% of whatever they're billing out at. And that's like passive income. Oh no, it is not passive income. It is very active income. And you're also going to hit a point where in that 4 to 7 range, your billable hours plummet. And suddenly this is a less profitable business. You will almost certainly hit a profit trough. So just understand that as you're going along, that there's going to be this inflection point where you have to decide to become a manager, and it is going to happen faster than you think. And you're going to have to really increase the margins past your comfort level in order to get your own income back to where it would have been just on your own. By the way, this leads to the second thing. If you're doing this and dipping your toe in the water, you're probably going to start out with thoughts of like, oh, I should only do like a 5 or 10% upcharge on their billable hours because like they're professionals like me. Look, we have the same like experience that's on our resume. How could I possibly justify paying them way less than me or whatever? Like, I understand that sentiment, but if you're going to become an agency, if you're going to subcontract out work beyond just ad hoc subcontracting here and there, you are going to have to work out a way to deliver enough value to your clients to charge substantially more than you're paying those people for it to be a profitable business. So I guess I'll come back to the freelance situation by saying I think it's worth it to take on subcontractors. If you are committed to at least trying out building an agency, then yes, you're going to need to do that sooner or later anyway. Try to figure it out, kind of work out the math of what you're going to pay them and what your margin is going to be and how you're going to justify that and so on and so forth. And then, yes, you need to go down the path of taking on subcontractors. If your goal is just to extend your capacity or to extend the breadth of your offering to be able to fulfill the full project, then it's worth it in as much as it's important to you to get that business and experience. And I can't really say for you whether that's the case or not. I would say it is going to be worth it if you have a decent chance of success. So if you have a client that comes along and they want you to do the SEO component of the site, and it's also going to require you to bring on like 10 subcontractors, I think you're going to have a hard time making the case that that's worth it, because you're fairly likely to face plant at that. It's going to thrust you into a full-time management role, which is going to be completely unfamiliar. And you and all these people are going to be getting to know each other on the fly. And there's just so many problems that are likely to crop up there that, yes, if you pulled it off, it might be worth it. But like, you have to understand your odds of pulling that off are not high. So I would say it's worth it if the odds of success are pretty good and it serves a goal, like getting a particular client into your book of business or onto your CV or your portfolio. That's the term I'm looking for. So if you really want that business and it seems feasible, then yes, I would say that it's worth it. And it's, good experience for you as an entrepreneur in general, because like having subs is kind of the first step towards having employees and some of the things that you would need to figure out later. It gives you a relatively like easy way to get some experience in doing those types of things. So, in the end, if you're looking at having a leverage business or an agency down the line, then yes, you want to gain some experience here. If you're just looking at taking on a particular piece of business, then it's probably worth it if you want the business, assuming that you feel like you can get it figured out. And I would not underestimate how much complexity there is to going and finding and bringing in other humans and managing them. That is, even in the best of circumstances, kind of, a lot to take on at once. In general, if I think of the path of a freelancer, my personal recommendation for building out a business, unless you want to build a body shop type agency, I would think more in terms of bringing on the breadth subcontractors than the capacity extending subcontractors, because bringing on the breadth subcontractors means that you're learning about a cross-discipline service offering that you could take on and deliver. And that is more likely to be less competitive and commodified in the in the marketplace. And it's more likely to be kind of a holistic solution for your clients. So that's one bonus piece of advice there is I would think more and look for opportunities more to take on subcontractors that complement you than extend you. But that's just my 2 cents. So hopefully somewhere in there I answered the question, because I don't remember what the specific situation was here. Should do better about documenting these things, but I'm often just like capturing, emails, especially when they're older. So anyway, hopefully that covers it if the person that asked the question, to see if I'm still watching. But maybe you had this question and you didn't ask it of me, and it has helped. I hope that is the case, and I will catch you next time.